So we are in Mullae now, which is a neighborhood in Yeongdeunpo and of course in Seoul. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Mullae, Mullae is an old industrial neighborhood, and when I first came here was for dinner actually a few months ago, and I really was intrigued by the neighborhood because there's all of these really large industrial manufacturing businesses. Some of them are still open and operating, and then other places are artist lofts. And it's really interesting to see these two things coexisting together. You know, there's kind of like this history of old in a way, and so there's this really trendy part of Mullae, which is all cafes and artist studios, crafty shops, restaurants that charge like a huge premium for wine bottles, you know, that kind of thing. When I came here, I was really nostalgic though, because my dad has a wood shop, and so, you know, I always grew up, you know, with the smell of wood chips and just like dust everywhere in the studio and all of these large machines running all the time. So coming here and hearing these noises like kind of brought me back to childhood a little bit. So I don't know, I kind of have a bit of a soft spot for Mullae, but still, I don't know, I like coming here a lot and I just find it kind of exciting. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about the history next. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Mullae was home to the majority of iron workers here in Seoul. So this was, like I said, an industrial neighborhood where essentially if you were an iron worker, this is where you had your studio. But as you know, and like with really every city on the planet, it gets expensive, right? So the prices that people paid for rent in the 1970s and 80s are just completely different to what they are now, you know? I mean, it's like an astronomical expense just to live in the city. So a lot of these iron workers ended up leaving Mullae, you know, not only due to pricing, but I think there was also some changes in policy about where they could have iron working. So some of them left, not all of them, but some. And they ended up leaving all of these massive vacant ironworking studios here. And so what happened was, similarly, artists who are in Mapo, Hongdae, Hapjeong areas, they heard about these open spaces, and you know, they were having a similar issue there where they were getting priced out of their artist studios because those areas are very, very expensive. So they ended up coming here and taking over a lot of these vacant properties with their artist studios and living and working here pretty cheaply comparatively to the area they were in before. So as far as the people who had their ironworking businesses here, you might be wondering where they left and where they went to after they left Mullae. And the answer is that simply, sometimes people just live outside of the city. You know, being in Seoul is really expensive pretty much in every neighborhood now. So a lot of times these people have just moved to more rural areas or smaller cities nearby Seoul. Now for the iron workers that ended up staying here, what most of them did was they actually bought their properties outright. So when price increases were coming here and rent was going through the roof, they weren't that affected by it. So we just crossed the street and we're still in the neighborhood, but I think we kind of passed into the more artistic and nicer, quote unquote, part of town. I mean, it's like considerably quieter here. And then there's also just a few shops, like there's a shop right next to me. I can hear someone working in there, but there's a ton of cafes and a few like pizza places, as well as a couple of jewelry designers over there too. So I think we've kind of come to the section that is a little bit more artistic. So we'll take a look around here also.
By the way, if you watch K-dramas, you're probably already familiar with Mullae, especially this sign. It's made appearances in Forecasting Love and Weather, Startup, 18 Again, among a few others. That's all for now. I hope you liked this quick tour of Mullae, an industrial yet surprisingly quaint neighborhood. Subscribe to my channel for other updates on traveling around the world.